A bull carried a girl on its back. When the farmer discovered the reason, he burst into tears. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and comment telling us where you're listening from. Tom Bradshaw's morning routine on his property outside Tamworth had been the same for 37 years. Wake at 5, coffee on the veranda while watching the sun rise over his 300 acres, then check on the cattle before breakfast. At 62, his body moved slower than it once did. His knees protested the early starts, but the routine was as much a part of him as breathing. The land had been in his family for 4 generations, and he'd raised his own children here, watched them grow and eventually leave for city lives he couldn't quite understand. This particular morning started like any other, but as Tom drove his ute along the fence line toward the eastern paddock, he saw something that made him slam on the brakes so hard the vehicle fish-tailed in the dust. His prize, Charolais bull, a massive cream-colored animal named Goliath, was walking slowly across the paddock with a small child sitting on his back. Tom's first thought was that he was hallucinating. Perhaps the medication for his blood pressure was causing side effects, but he blinked, rubbed his eyes, and the scene remained. A little girl, couldn't be more than 6 or 7 years old, sat perched on Goliath's broad back, her small hands gripping the bull's thick neck. The animal moved with deliberate care, his massive head lowered, placing each hoof carefully as if aware of the precious cargo he carried. Tom's heart hammered in his chest as he killed the engine and climbed out slowly, not wanting to startle the bull or the child. Goliath was normally docile for such a large animal, but he was still a 1,200-kilogram bull with impressive horns. One wrong move, one moment of panic, and that child could be seriously hurt or killed. "Easy there, mate," Tom called out softly, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Nice and slow." Goliath's ears flicked toward Tom's voice, but the bull didn't stop walking. He continued his careful progress across the paddock, moving toward the old machinery shed at the far edge of the property. The little girl didn't acknowledge Tom's presence. She stared straight ahead, her face eerily blank, her posture rigid. Tom followed on foot, maintaining his distance, his mind racing. Where had this child come from? There were no neighbors within 2 kilometers, and his property was well fenced. Had she wandered off from somewhere? Was she lost, confused, possibly in shock? And how in God's name had she ended up on Goliath's back? As they approached the shed, Tom finally got a clear look at the child. She was wearing a pink nightgown, torn and dirty, with no shoes on her small feet. Her blonde hair was tangled and matted, and even from several meters away, Tom could see scratches on her arms and legs. She'd been through something traumatic. That much was obvious. Goliath stopped at the shed entrance, a structure Tom rarely used anymore, filled with old equipment and years of accumulated junk. The bull lowered himself slowly, carefully, until his belly nearly touched the ground. The little girl slid off his back with practiced ease, as if she'd done this before, and immediately ducked into the shed through a gap in the weathered boards. Tom moved quickly then, reaching Goliath just as the bull was struggling back to his feet. The animal's breathing was labored, his sides heaving with effort. Tom ran his hands along Goliath's neck, checking for injuries, trying to understand what had happened. The bull nuzzled Tom's shoulder gently, making a low, rumbling sound that Tom had learned over the years meant the animal was distressed. "What's going on, old boy? What have you got yourself mixed up in?" Tom approached the shed cautiously, peering through the gap where the child had disappeared. His eyes took a moment to adjust to the dim interior, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The little girl was huddled in a corner, surrounded by what looked like a makeshift nest of old Hessian bags and horse blankets. There was a plastic water bottle, nearly empty, and several empty food wrappers that Tom recognized from his own kitchen. Someone had been living in his shed, and from the look of it for several days at least. "Hey there, sweetheart," Tom said gently, crouching down to make himself less threatening. "My name's Tom. This is my property. Are you all right? Are you hurt?" The girl didn't respond. She stared at him with huge blue eyes, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Now that Tom's eyes had fully adjusted, he could see she was in worse shape than he'd first thought. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones too prominent, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She'd been through more than just a day or two of hardship. Tom's phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. He pulled it out carefully, not wanting to startle the child, and saw it was his neighbor, Michelle Peterson. He answered, keeping his voice low and calm. "Tom, thank God." Michelle's voice was tight with anxiety. "Have you heard about the missing child? The police have been searching all night. Little girl named Sophie Brennan, 7 years old, disappeared from a campground at Nundle yesterday afternoon. Her family was hiking, and she just vanished. They think she might have wandered off and gotten lost in the bush." Tom's eyes fixed on the trembling child in the corner of his shed. "Michelle, I think I've found her. She's on my property, in the old machinery shed. And Michelle, this is going to sound mad, but my bull brought her here, carried her on his back." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Your bull." I know how it sounds, but I watched it happen. Goliath had her on his back, brought her straight to this shed. "I'm calling the police and her family right now," Michelle said, her voice trembling. "Tom, don't let her leave. They've been out of their minds with worry." After Michelle hung up, Tom sat down slowly on an overturned crate near the shed entrance, giving Sophie space but blocking the only exit. He didn't want to frighten her further, but he couldn't risk her running off before help arrived. Outside, Goliath had positioned himself near the shed door, as if standing guard. "Sophie," Tom said gently. "That's your name, isn't it? Sophie Brennan. Your mum and dad have been looking for you. They're very worried." At the mention of her parents, Sophie's face crumpled. Tears began streaming down her dirty cheeks, but she still didn't speak. Tom's heart broke watching her. Whatever this little girl had been through in the past 24 hours had traumatized her deeply. "It's all right, love. You're safe now. Your family will be here soon." Tom kept his voice steady and calm, the same tone he used with frightened animals. "Can you tell me how you got here, how you met my bull?" Sophie's eyes flickered toward the shed entrance where Goliath's shadow was visible. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then barely a whisper, "He found me." "Goliath found you? Where, sweetheart?" "In the bush. I was lost. It was getting dark." Sophie's voice was hoarse, probably from dehydration and crying. "I heard something big coming through the trees. I thought it was going to hurt me. But then I saw him. He was big, but his eyes were nice, like my grandpa's eyes." Tom felt a lump forming in his throat. He glanced at Goliath, who was still maintaining his vigil by the door. The bull had wandered into the northern section of Tom's property, which bordered the Nundle State Forest where Sophie had gone missing. The timing and location made sense now. "What did he do when he found you?" "He laid down next to me. I was cold and scared, and he was warm. Sophie wiped at her tears with a filthy hand. He stayed with me all night. When the sun came up, he stood up and made noises at me, like he wanted me to follow, but I was too tired to walk anymore. My feet hurt really bad." Tom looked at her bare feet, now seeing the extent of the damage. They were covered in cuts, scratches, and what looked like the beginning of infection. The child must have walked kilometers through rough bush in nothing but a nightgown. "So he let you climb on his back?" Tom asked, amazed. Sophie nodded. "He got down low again like he knew I needed help. I didn't know what else to do, so I got on. He brought me here." She looked around the shed. "I found food in some boxes and water from that tap outside. I was going to go find help, but I was so scared. What if I got lost again? What if the bad thing in the bush found me?" "Bad thing?" Tom's protective instincts immediately sharpened. "Sophie, did someone hurt you? Is that why you were in the bush?" "No, no person hurt me." Sophie shook her head quickly. "But there was something out there. Something that chased me. That's why I ran away from the camping area. I heard it following me, making horrible sounds. I just kept running and running until I couldn't run anymore." Tom's mind worked through the possibilities. The area was home to wild pigs, which could make terrifying sounds, and were known to be aggressive if surprised. There were also dingoes, though attacks on humans were rare. Whatever Sophie had encountered, her fear had been real enough to send her fleeing into unfamiliar bush in her nightclothes. The sound of vehicles approaching made them both look toward the shed entrance. Within minutes, the old machinery shed was surrounded by police cars, an ambulance, and a civilian vehicle that screeched to a halt, doors flying open before it had fully stopped. A woman in hiking clothes leaped out, followed by a man, both of them calling Sophie's name with voices raw from hours of shouting and crying. "Mummy!" Sophie finally broke her silence with a scream, scrambling to her feet and running toward the shed entrance. Tom moved aside quickly, and Sophie burst out into the morning sunlight, throwing herself into her mother's arms. The reunion was desperate and tearful, both parents clutching their daughter as if they'd never let her go again. Tom found himself wiping away tears, the emotional release hitting him hard after the tense morning. Senior Constable David Walsh approached Tom while the paramedics examined Sophie. "Mr. Bradshaw, I'm going to need to get a statement from you about how you found her." "I didn't find her," Tom said, gesturing toward Goliath, who was still standing nearby, watching the commotion with what Tom could swear was a satisfied expression. "He did." Tom explained everything he'd seen, knowing how incredible it sounded. The constable's eyebrows rose higher with each detail, but he dutifully wrote it all down. Other officers examined the shed, photographing Sophie's makeshift camp, documenting the evidence of her survival. Sophie's father, James Brennan, approached Tom once his daughter had been loaded into the ambulance for transport to Tamworth Hospital. The man's eyes were red and swollen from crying, but his handshake was firm and heartfelt. "Mr. Bradshaw, I don't have words to thank you. And your bull." James looked at Goliath with wonder. The paramedic said Sophie's in surprisingly good condition, considering what she's been through. They said another day or two in the bush, and the outcome could have been very different. Your bull saved my daughter's life. "He's always been a good old boy," Tom said, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I've had him for 8 years, and I've never seen him do anything like this. Never seen any cattle do anything like this." "The police said they searched this area yesterday afternoon," James continued. "Helicopters, ground teams, search dogs. How did they miss this shed? It's tucked back in the trees, not visible from the air unless you know exactly where to look. And the dogs—" Tom paused, then looked at Goliath again. "I reckon they probably caught his scent and dismissed it as livestock. Never thought to check why a bull would be hanging around an unused shed." As the ambulance pulled away with Sophie and her mother inside, James stayed behind to finish giving his statement to police. Tom invited him into the house for a cup of tea, the Australian remedy for shock and trauma. They sat at Tom's worn kitchen table, both men still processing what had happened. "She kept talking about him in the ambulance," James said, cradling his mug, "asking if the big white cow was okay, if he'd be there when we came back." The paramedic tried to explain that bulls and cows are different, but Sophie just kept saying he was her friend, that he saved her. Tom looked out the window toward the paddock where Goliath had returned to grazing, seemingly unconcerned with the morning's drama. "I raised that bull from a calf, bottle-fed him after his mother rejected him. Maybe that's why he's different, why he's got such a gentle nature. But this—" Tom shook his head. "This is beyond anything I've ever seen or heard of. The police want to investigate the area where Sophie says she first encountered your bull," James said. "They want to confirm her story, look for evidence of what might have frightened her. She's adamant something was chasing her. Over the next few days, the story spread through the region like wildfire. Local media picked it up first, then state news, and finally national outlets. Tom's phone rang constantly with interview requests, which he mostly declined. He was a private man, uncomfortable with attention, and he worried about the impact on Sophie's family, who were dealing with their own media circus at the hospital. Sophie spent 3 days at Tamworth Hospital being treated for dehydration, minor infections from her cuts and scratches, and severe blistering on her feet. Child psychologists were brought in to help her process the trauma, though by all accounts, Sophie was remarkably resilient. Her main concern, according to the nurses, was when she could visit Goliath again. On the 4th day after the rescue, the Brennan family drove out to Tom's property. Sophie, riding in a wheelchair because of her damaged feet, lit up the moment she saw the familiar paddock. Tom had been warned they were coming, and he'd brought Goliath into the smaller holding yard near the house, wanting to control the reunion for everyone's safety. When Sophie saw Goliath, she burst into tears of joy, reaching out her arms toward him. The massive bull approached the fence slowly, his movements as careful and deliberate as they'd been when carrying her on his back. He lowered his head, allowing Sophie to reach through the rails and touch his broad forehead. "Thank you," Sophie whispered, her small hands on either side of Goliath's face. "Thank you for saving me." Tom watched from a short distance away, and for the second time in 4 days, he found himself crying. There was something profoundly moving about the connection between this small child and the enormous animal, something that transcended normal human-animal relationships. James stood beside Tom, his own eyes glistening. "My daughter wants to know if she can visit him regularly," James said quietly. "We live in Newcastle, but we come up to the area often for hiking and camping. Well, we will again, eventually, once Sophie's ready." "She's welcome any time," Tom replied without hesitation. "And James, I've been thinking. I know you folks have been through hell these past few days, but there's something I want you to consider." Tom explained his idea. Goliath was getting older, past his prime breeding years. Tom had been planning to retire him anyway, let him live out his remaining years in peace. But what if Goliath could have a greater purpose? What if his remarkable gentleness and intelligence could be put to use helping other children? There are programs, therapeutic programs, that use horses to help children with trauma, disabilities, all sorts of challenges, Tom said. They call it equine therapy. But why not cattle? Why not Goliath specifically? He's proven he's got the temperament for it, proven he's safe with children. Your Sophie isn't the only kid who could benefit from spending time with an animal like him. James looked at his daughter, still communing with Goliath through the fence rails, and something shifted in his expression. "That's a beautiful idea, Tom, but do programs like that exist for cattle? Would anyone take it seriously? If they don't exist, maybe it's time they did." Tom had been researching online for the past 3 days, looking into animal-assisted therapy programs, learning about their structure and requirements. "I've got the land, I've got the animal, and I've got the time. I'm retired except for this property. What I don't have is the expertise in dealing with traumatized kids, or the connections to make something like this happen. But I might," James said slowly. "I'm a social worker, specializing in child trauma cases. My wife's a pediatric nurse. We've both seen the impact of animal therapy, recommended it to families. If you're serious about this, Tom, we could help you set something up properly. Make sure it's done right, safely, ethically." The conversation continued long into the afternoon. Sophie's mother, Amanda, joined in once she'd finished taking photos and videos of her daughter with Goliath. The more they talked, the more the idea took shape. It wouldn't be easy. There would be regulations to navigate, insurance to secure, facilities to build, and training to complete. But it was possible. 2 weeks later, Animal behavior specialists from the University of New England arrived to evaluate Goliath. Tom had been nervous about the assessment, worried they'd find his bull too unpredictable or dangerous for therapeutic work. But Goliath passed every test with remarkable calm. He tolerated strangers touching him, loud noises, sudden movements, even allowed small children from a local primary school to approach and interact with him under controlled conditions. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead behaviorist, was impressed. In 20 years of studying cattle behavior, I've never encountered an animal quite like this. He's not just docile, which is common enough in well-handled cattle. He's actively gentle, aware of his size and strength in relation to smaller, vulnerable beings. It's extraordinary. "So you think he could work in a therapeutic setting?" Tom asked hopefully. "I think he'd be perfect for it, but Mr. Bradshaw, you need to understand the commitment you're making. This isn't just letting kids pat a friendly bull. Therapeutic programs require structure, consistency, proper facilities, trained staff. Are you prepared for all that?" "I am," Tom said with conviction he hadn't felt about anything in years. Since his wife had died 5 years earlier, since his kids had moved away, Tom had been going through the motions of living without really engaging with life. Goliath's rescue of Sophie had awakened something in him, reminded him that he still had something valuable to contribute. 6 months after Sophie's rescue, Tom stood at the entrance to his property, looking at the new sign that had been installed that morning. Goliath's Haven, Animal Assisted Therapy Center. It read, the letters painted in cheerful colors against a white background. Below, a professionally designed logo showed a stylized bull with a child's hand resting on its shoulder. The transformation of Tom's property had been remarkable. With funding from grants, donations, and the tireless work of the Brennan family and their network of supporters, a proper therapy facility had been established. A covered arena with soft footing provided a safe space for sessions regardless of weather. A small office building housed the administrative side of operations. Bathrooms, a waiting area for families, and a sensory room for children who needed quiet time had all been added, but the heart of it all remained Goliath himself. The old bull had taken to his new role with the same calm patience he'd shown throughout his life. Under the guidance of trained therapists and with Dr. Chen's ongoing consultation, Goliath worked with children dealing with trauma, autism, anxiety, and various other challenges. His size, which could have been intimidating, instead became part of his therapeutic value. Children learned to overcome fear, to trust, to find courage in themselves by connecting with this gentle giant. Sophie was, naturally, their first client. Her sessions with Goliath had been instrumental in processing her trauma from being lost in the bush. The nightmares that had plagued her for weeks after the rescue gradually faded. Her confidence returned, and the bond between girl and bull only deepened with regular contact. On this particular afternoon, Tom watched as Sophie, now 8 years old and completely healed from her ordeal, helped lead Goliath around the arena, while a new client, a 6-year-old boy named Lucas, sat nervously on the fence rail. Lucas had been in a car accident that killed his older sister. He'd stopped speaking entirely after the trauma, hadn't said a word in 4 months. "Lucas," Sophie said gently, using the same calm tone she'd learned from Tom and the therapists. "This is Goliath. He's really big, but he's the kindest friend I've ever had. Would you like to touch him?" Lucas shook his head, but his eyes were fixed on the massive bull. Goliath, as if sensing the boy's fear, stopped walking and simply stood still, allowing Lucas to observe him from a safe distance. Minutes passed. The therapist, a woman named Jennifer Moss, who'd trained specifically for this program, gave no pressure, allowing Lucas to set his own pace. Then, slowly, Lucas climbed down from the fence. He took one step toward Goliath, then another. Sophie backed away, giving him space. When Lucas was within arm's reach, Goliath lowered his head very slowly, positioning himself at the boy's height. Lucas reached out with a trembling hand and touched Goliath's forehead. "Soft," Lucas whispered. It was the first word he'd spoken in 4 months. His mother, watching from outside the arena, burst into tears. Jennifer's eyes met Tom's across the space, and they shared a look of quiet triumph. This was why they were doing this work. These moments of breakthrough, of healing, of connection. By the end of the year, Goliath's Haven was working with 15 regular clients and had a waiting list of families wanting to participate. The program had attracted attention from therapeutic communities across Australia, with several facilities expressing interest in developing similar cattle-based therapy programs. Tom had been invited to speak at conferences to share Goliath's story and the data they were collecting on outcomes. But for Tom, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or even the success of the program. It was watching his bull, who he'd bottle-fed as a rejected calf all those years ago, fulfill a purpose neither of them could have imagined. Every child who found courage through Goliath, every family who found hope, was a testament to the remarkable capacity of animals to heal human hearts. One evening, after the last clients had left and the facility was quiet, Tom brought Goliath some apple slices, his favorite treat. The bull took them gently from Tom's weathered hand, the same way he took treats from the children's smaller hands. Tom leaned against Goliath's massive shoulder, feeling the warmth and solidity of his oldest friend. "You know what the best part is, old boy," Tom said quietly. "All these years, I thought I was the one who saved you, bottle-feeding you when your mother wouldn't. But you were the one doing the saving all along. You saved Sophie. You saved me from loneliness and purposelessness. You're saving all these kids now. Who knew that a rejected calf would grow up to be such a hero?" Goliath rumbled softly, the sound vibrating through his chest where Tom's hand rested. In the fading golden light of evening, they stood together in the arena that had become their shared purpose, man and bull united in a mission of healing. The Brennan family had become like an extension of Tom's own family. James helped run the administrative side of Goliath's Haven. Amanda volunteered her nursing skills when needed, and Sophie, who came every weekend without fail, had become something of a junior ambassador for the program. She shared her story with new families, helped nervous children take their first steps toward Goliath, demonstrated that trust and courage could overcome fear and trauma. On the anniversary of Sophie's rescue, the program held a special celebration. Media were invited, not for sensationalism, but to highlight the importance of animal-assisted therapy and to encourage funding for similar programs. Sophie stood beside Goliath, a hand on his shoulder, no longer the terrified, lost little girl in a torn nightgown, but a confident young person who'd found her strength through an extraordinary friendship. "Goliath saved my life," Sophie told the assembled crowd, her voice clear and strong. "But he did more than that. He showed me that even when you're scared and lost, help can come from unexpected places. He showed me that being big and strong doesn't mean you have to be scary. It means you can protect people who need protecting. He showed me that kindness is the most powerful thing in the world." As the crowd applauded, Tom wiped away tears. They came easily now, these tears of joy and purpose and gratitude. He'd spent so many years after his wife's death wondering if his best days were behind him, if he had anything left to contribute to the world. Goliath had answered that question definitively. The bull, unaware of the significance of the moment, simply stood peacefully beside his favorite girl, his eyes half closed in contentment. He'd gone from rejected calf to unwanted burden, to unlikely hero, to therapeutic partner. And through it all, he'd remained exactly what he'd always been, a gentle soul with an enormous capacity for love and an instinct to protect those who needed protection. And Tom Bradshaw, who'd thought his story was winding down, had discovered that sometimes life's most important chapters begin in the most unexpected ways, with a lost child, a gentle bull, and a chance to make a difference that would ripple outward, touching lives for years to come.